your typical intro, maybe do that first, and
Okay,
then
and then we'll jump into that.
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's do that. Okay, let me do the first intro. All right. You ready?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk about House. Hi, I'm Austinlugo,
I'm Andrew Harp.
and this is With Nothing to Say.
Yeah. Should
So,
I introduce the movie?
I don't even know how to talk about this movie. I'm
It's one
just,
of my favorites. It's one of the best. It's one of the all-time greatest movies. One of my personal favorites. It's up there, I would say. I love it. Of course, we're talking about the 1977 horror comedy horror
saying,
film directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi. I'm
yeah,
assuming you didn't like it.
no, I'm just, I watched the film maybe like, it's probably been like almost a week now, and I'm still just like, I'm just sitting with it, and I'm still struggling to figure out how I feel about it.
So yeah, honestly, yeah. Like I watched it a couple nights ago, and that might have been the third or fourth time I've ever seen it.
Mhm.
And yeah, every time I watch it, I'm always just like, yeah, I'm always like amazed how many things happen. And by things, I don't even necessarily mean like plot things because it's a relatively simple story.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that it utilizes so many different effects, animation, themes and ideas, editing choices and practices that all kind of like happen very quickly. So it's a movie where like a lot happens visually, I guess you could say, to where it kind of creates like a dizzying quality in a way. So yeah, so well, tell me generally what the movie, like the plot of the movie, what it is, like in a sentence or two.
Okay, so basically, there's this group of high school girls, and one of them, Fantasy, I think, her mom's like gone or dead or something, and her dad's going to
It's
marry
I think it's gorgeous.
Gorgeous. Oh, Gorgeous. Okay.
Mm.
So Gorgeous and her group of friends, they're like in middle school or high school or something, and Gorgeous' dad is going to marry a new woman, her new mom, and she's not into that. And so they go to Gorgeous' aunt's house. Is that whose aunt's house, or is it one of the other
It's
things?
gorgeous as Anne.
Okay, they go to Gorgeous' aunt's house, who she hasn't talked to in a super long time, and she brings all of her friends with her, and a lot of freaky, weird things happen at the house. And at the end of the film, they are pretty much all dead.
Yeah, it's basically a haunted house movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Like pretty much is like it's kind of like a ghost haunted house story. Yeah, like you said, that's pretty much the idea. A group of girls go to a house and spooky things happen. I guess there's more to it than that.
All right, so like it opens up on at the middle school, right? That's like where it
Yeah,
starts.
they're at the school. They're like taking pictures. And remember, like Fantasy's taking pictures of Gorgeous, and Fantasy says something like, "Oh, you look like a witch" or something like that. It kind of foreshadows, I guess, like kind of the kind of person that Gorgeous will become at the end of the movie.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of talk about like witches and kind of like magical
Mm.
things. I think from the very beginning of the film, it's really I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. It is very intense almost in just like the amount of not necessarily things that are happening in the plot, but just like things going on like visually. Because it's just like it's all over like it's the music is just like everywhere and it's just like it jumps and it's using like and our director uses like 30 different like film techniques and they're all kind of going back and forth and it's just like hard to almost like get a handle of anything because like it's everywhere constantly. It reminds me of like have you ever watched the news for like those Japanese like news channels?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a million things going on at once.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah, and that's like, and that's kind of the thing. I would say the movie is definitely more like that
Mhm.
before they get to the house, which I
Yeah.
like that part of the movie. I like both parts of the movie before they get to the house and when they get to the house because I feel like the first half of the movie, before the first half, third or so,
Yeah.
it's almost like it's edited very, it doesn't set up too much that it's a horror movie. it's almost like edited and kind of looks like, I don't know, some kind of like innocent manga for
Yeah.
like girls or something like that. You know, it's almost comedic with kind of just kind of, and the way that they talk and the way that they interact with each other is very, I guess, you know, it just kind of feels like a kind of very innocent. We're watching a very like innocent kind of like almost like Japanese kind of teenage girl show or something like that, which I've never really watched before. But I feel like that was the vibe I was getting for some reason. But yeah, I love that part because it's so funny. I love that whole part of the movie because there's something so funny about it. Just the way that people, you know, talk and act and the little things that they say. It's just so weird. And the editing too, like they do the thing where like it'll be like the background of like grass or plants, and it'll be like a person's like face imposed over it, and it has kind of like a weird dreamy quality to it. And like the movie does kind of have like a weird kind of like cloudy or foggy filter over it, as if the world is kind of like made of like plastic or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know if I wanna use the word kitschy, but I think you kinda described it well earlier when you said there's this almost Disney-esque style, but then, like, it feels ironic or, like, over the top. Like, I think, like, the humor isn't right? I think the humor isn't so much as, like, they're telling a lot of, like, jokes, but it's, like, sort of ironic because it's, like, it's Disney-esque, but it's, like, just so over the top, almost plasticky or, like, very, fake in a certain way, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. Like when you watch it, it's very apparent. You know what I mean? Like what kind of they're trying to do here.
Mhm.
They're kind of trying to almost create like a juxtaposition between the different parts of the movie. You know,
Yeah.
a very strong disposition, I feel, is what they're doing. So when like the crazy stuff happens at the house, it's kind of shocking. I guess I'll continue on with the plot of the movie because it kind of serves that. So basically, yeah, like you said, they are at the school, gorgeous in fantasy. They're taking pictures. I think they run into like their gym teacher or something.
Yeah.
They say like she's getting married, and you know like, they're like, oh my gosh, you're getting married, and it's a very very innocent, and there's something kind of weird and pure and innocent about it in that conversation and all the conversations.
Mm.
And then yeah, like you said, gorgeous, she goes home, her dad has been away, and it turns out that she's going to have a new stepmom. I like the stepmom character because every time you see her on screen, it looks like there's like a big industrial fan blowing on her,
Yeah.
her hair and like her scarf and her clothes, or like she's like the only character. Like it's not like everybody's getting wind blown on them.
It's just her.
Every time you see her, she has like it looks like she's like, you know, like it's so funny. And Gorgeous gets pissed off because she's just like, I want to have my mom who is dead. And then she's kind of upset, and she goes to kind of talk to her friends, I guess,
Mhm.
which the cast is really good, specifically the seven girls.
Yeah.
They're like the seven dwarves or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, like I guess you could explain that if you want.
Yeah, so, like, there's 7 different girls, and their names all kind of relate to how it's like their personality almost,
Yeah, they have like one personality, and then their names relate to that. Yeah,
yeah, and they, like, kind of introduce each one of them, especially when they're, like, on their way to the house, they kinda have these, like, little almost like it reminds me of, almost like a 60s or 70s television show, you know what I mean? Where, like, they'll introduce each character, and they'll be doing, like, their own yeah. And they'll be doing, like, their own kooky thing. I actually sort of thought I think this would require a lot more thought on my end, than I've put into it, but I was kind of interested in the idea because all of these different characters, the 7 different characters, they seem to, like, symbolize these kind of, like, different ideas, and, I don't know if I thought this so much at the end, but towards like the beginning and the middle of the film, I sort of thought the 7 different characters as like the 7 deadly sins.
oh yeah, yeah,
Each one's very kind of like
yeah.
gluttony or like vanity or like these kind of things. And so you're introduced to all these different characters. And I'm gonna be honest, I struggled to keep track of who was who, just because even because I mean I think all the performances were great, and supposedly a lot of the actors in this weren't professional actors, which is even more that just right kind of shows just incredible direction, and the interaction between each is really interesting. I think it really grows, especially in the film, like who's kind of with who. But at the beginning, They're just kind of like these 7 group of friends who just all like each other, and they all have kind of their, like, own wants and needs, and then one of them is in love with, like, is he, like, a male teacher or
He's a teacher, which was kind of funny. It's like kind of weird. It's like, yeah, like early on in the movie, they're talking about like their teacher, Mr. Togo, or
yes,
I'm
something
not
like
sure if
that.
that's how you say it, but yeah, like they're going on. They were supposed to go on a trip with him somewhere, and then he says like, "Oh, we can't go to the, I guess like a beach house or something because my
Yeah.
sister had your baby or something like that." And they're like, "Oh, dang." So what happens then is that like because some of the girls were going to do this other thing and that got canceled and now Gorgeous doesn't want to hang out with her dad anymore, she's like, hey, I know my auntie, you know, lives kind of far away, I forget where, but she like lives in a nice house, from my hometown is I guess what she said. Maybe we can go and hang out there. And they're like, okay. And she writes her aunt a letter and she gets one back basically saying like, oh yeah, you should, yeah, you and your friend should definitely come through. And that's kind of like, yeah, that's right before they leave to go to the train. But yeah, like you said, like yeah, like one of them, one of the characters, I forget which one actually, but one of the characters is like, I'm in love with the teacher.
So they all decide to go on this trip together, and so they get on the train first, I think?
I think they go on the, I think they go on a walk and then they go on the train and
Yeah.
then they go on another walk.
Yeah, and then on the train, that's where you're introduced to kind of like the backstory of the aunt, who's like, okay, so there was her aunt and her mother. I can't remember which one was the. Oh, it was her aunt, the one that was in love with.
With
Um,
the guy who's going to the war.
yes, and I think this is
She's
kind of, and I think this is kind of like a really important moment in the film. And I enjoyed the kind of like backstory or whatever that they do because it's shot in the like style of like 1940s like
yeah, no, they did a good job.
propaganda.
Kind of
Yeah,
old.
yeah, it's incredible, and I think like at that moment, I kind of had a moment to kind of like breathe because the film is like I said, it's kind of intense, and this kind of moment that kind of lives more in your traditional kind of film narrative kind of stuff. And we learned that the she was going to marry this man, but he ends up going into the war and dies in World War II, and she basically never gets to get married, right?
Yeah, she never marries, she never has kids.
She never marries, she never has any kids. And this is also, I mean, the obvious kind of connotations behind this is, and what's interesting, they don't really like say, but it's weighing pretty heavily, I'd say, on the film is, of course, Hiroshima and
Yeah,
the
big one.
nuclear attacks, which kind of like they shape the story in this really interesting way, just in the sense that it feels almost like radioactive and like it's so like bright and big, and it's just kind of like always, and they never mention it, which they did a lot in Japanese films in the 1950s and 60s. It would just kind of of course famously Godzilla, which is just a direct analogy for the nuclear bomb and all that. But I think in this way it kind of goes about it an interesting way, which is it's there and they never talk about it, but it kind of feels it looms in a certain way, I think.
I think, yeah, like you said, they're watching the back. It's kind of funny because like she's telling the story, but the girls are reacting as if they're watching
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
television.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're on the train. They're not watching anything. We're watching something, but they're reacting to it, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
Then yeah, at the very end, they show like shots of like a nuclear bomb explosion, and I think Mac, who is, which makes me laugh. Mac, she is kind of, I guess, like the one who loves to eat. She loves food. That's like her thing. She says like, "Oh, it's like cotton candy" or something like that. So yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that's almost kind of like the crux of the movie, sort of, where maybe like it's almost kind of like like this movie came out in the '70s. You kind of almost kind of see kind of like there is probably a certain amount of dissonance between the generation that experienced the bomb in one way or another, and then the generation that came after that literally have no relation to it at all. I guess you could say
Mhm.
this almost kind of creates like I guess maybe some like I guess you could say some like dissonance or something like that
Mhm.
between these two generations, almost as if like the younger generation doesn't necessarily realize or understand that like the theoretical, not theoretical, but the figurative ghost of like the atom bomb, like kind of still looms in the country and within, I guess, the people's DNA. If you literally and metaphorically, I guess you could say. So I think that's you can almost say that like the haunted house of House is like the country of Japan where it's being haunted. Japan is being haunted by the, I guess, the grief and the trauma of the bomb in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. In a certain way, and this is probably the only comparison you could make to a Ozu film, because the Ozu film is probably on the opposite end of the spectrum. But much like an Ozu film, it's a lot of it is about sort of the kind of gap in the generations, which is really, I think, when you kind of look at the gap in generations in like the Americas or different parts of Europe or other places, it's not really as big of a deal. But I think why so many filmmakers in Japan specifically focused on sort of this gap in generations is because for one generation, especially those who fought in the war, the United States was this sort of, I mean, for obvious reasons, very evil, corrupted, terrible being. But then, you go down simply one generation, and not only are the Americans the allies, but a lot of Japanese youth are actually, adapting the culture and the kind of idealism, if you want to call it that, of America. They're playing baseball. They're kind of playing into these like corporate capitalistic realms, and it's this very really strange dichotomy between the two, trying to kind of fight each other. And maybe in Ozu, it's perhaps looked more from the older generation and trying to kind of hold on to the past, where this one seems more from the perspective of the children, even if that is sort of terrifying, I guess.
It's very good. So yeah, they talk on the train. I like on the train too. There's like nuns and sailors and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
also riding on the train. Also, like throughout the movie, well, you kind of find out at the end of the movie, but like there's a cat that keeps following them around. It's like this white cat. I forget the name, but Blanche. Blanche is the name of the cat, and that kind of comes in later. But yeah, they arrive where they need to arrive, and I like when they arrive, they like stop. They're basically in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. Really nice paintings too, by the way. Really good matte paintings, very very nice looking. They're kind of like not realistic, but that's good. Like if they made it really super realistic, it would look, I think, like not part of the movie. So I
Yeah.
like that. And yeah, they get off and they just kind of head over to the house. I think they just kind of walk, and then they come across the watermelon vendor.
It's a very silly scene, although of course there's a sort of ominous undertone to the conversation with the watermelon man.
Yeah, it's a kind of like a horror movie cliche where teenagers are going to a cabin or to a camp or a lake or whatever. They're going in the middle of the woods and they stop at a gas station, and the guy at the gas station is like, I'm gonna warn, I'm warning you, don't go there. You might die, or something like that. And they're like, oh, whatever. It's kind of like that, but not really.
Yeah,
But it's kind of that.
yeah, absolutely. And to kind of go back to kind of the way the scenes look and the dreamlike quality to it, it reminds me a lot of. Have you ever seen Dodeskiden? It's a late Kurosawa film. It's one of his final films. I think came out in the late '70s, early '80s, maybe. But much like that film, it's all shot on or like this film, a lot of it's shot on a soundstage, and there's this very strange, dreamlike quality to the whole thing. And it doesn't feel real in a certain sense, but that kind of like it works into it, just like in this one where like the scenes don't look, as you were saying, kind of realistic. But if they did look realistic, it really wouldn't work. And much like Dodeskiden, I think it kind of plays into this fantasy world that we're all trying to be part of.
I love it. I love how it looks. I love how the whole movie looks. The sets look great. The paintings look great. Like I said, it kind of has this weird kind of foggy filter over it,
Hmm.
but it kind of adds to the, I guess, the strangeness of it. That kind of, it almost kind of separates you a little bit, but in a good way. It kind of like creates like I think movies desperately always. I think that's kind of the thing about movies is that like I think a lot of movie directors are maybe obsessed with making a movie seem real or realistic.
Hmm.
I like House because there are things about it that are real, but the way that the movie looks feels so fake and it feels so off, which I think is great. But yeah, they meet the watermelon vendor, and he has these big, comically round, giant watermelons. Yeah, he basically just says like, "Oh, you're going to the house," da da da, and they go to the house, um, and they meet Auntie, and right away it's like kind of weird. Like it's a big, giant house, and then while they're meeting, Mac also brings a watermelon, which is important to the story. She like goes back and gets a watermelon. She comes back, it's a big round watermelon, And yeah, they meet Auntie, and she has the cat. The cat kind of sits on her lap as if like that's her friend or something like that,
Mhm.
as if like she knows it. And I guess one of the first weird things is that Sweet tries to take a picture of everybody, and Auntie like does something. I think like her eyes flash or the cat's eyes flash,
Yeah.
and the camera like just suddenly comes out of her hands and it breaks. And it's like, oh, okay. And they go in and they turn on some lights and they're kind of walking around and everything's kind of weird and strange. And I think they go into the kitchen and she talks to like her like appliances and she's like, I think she says like hello stove and it kind of moves around, but they don't notice it. Like once again, it's like you can almost say that the downfall of our characters are totally fine. They're very, very nice and sweet. They're all fun, but you can almost say that the downfall of them is their inability to pay attention or their innocentness, their over innocentness, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's like that's almost kind of like their downfall, which we will talk about in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say their innocence is almost like I think what this film is trying to portray in a certain sense is that while innocence is perhaps something maybe you're born with or it's something that you have, it's also, especially for these characters, it's something that they choose to prolong and choose to kind of continue in that sort of naivete and kind of don't like in a certain sense kind of purposely ignore their surroundings so they can keep this sort of innocence in their lives. So they're constantly, kind of so focused on being innocent that they maybe fail to see the realities of the world, even if in this world it's sort of strange.
I think I was incorrect. It might have been fantasy, the one with the camera, but yeah, I totally agree with that. They're totally locked in, I guess you could say, for now. Yeah, they're just kind of doting around and they're kind of hanging out and they're talking to each other and they're doing funny things. And I think one of them, like weird little things happens, which is great. I think the buildup of kind of the strangeness of the house is great. I think someone's taking a bath and like these like weird, it looks like hairs or something, kind of like
Yeah,
go up on her back.
like
That was
tendril or
great.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too about the movie is that like that's kind of almost really hard to explain because so much is going on. Is just the way that everything is edited and the animation as well.
Mhm.
It's so hard to talk about because there's so many little things that are really good. We kind of talked about The Graduate, remember? And The Graduate has great editing and film work as well, but it's very, very simple. There's like a handful of things that work very, very well. Whole movie works, but like it only does like a couple different things. But when it does those things, it does it very, very well. And you're just like, wow, that's awesome, just the way it uses that one thing over and over again, but it feels new every time. The house is just like, it's not that. It's like many different things. One of my favorites, of course, is when you get like a picture of the scene and then it'll do like a spotlight on a character. So the whole screen will go back except for like a circle on one character. It'll do that a few different times in the movie for, I guess, just to say like, hey, focus on this person right here or thing or whatever. A lot of like animation things like that. Yeah, where like the hair when she's in the bathroom, and yeah, like the stove moving and like things shaking around and stuff like that. It's just yeah, it's like too much to talk about. It's like impossible.
And it's important to note that when they get the watermelon, they want to keep it cool.
Yes.
They ask to put it in the fridge, but she says the fridge doesn't work.
Yeah.
So they go out and put it in the well to kind of
Yes.
cool it down.
And then I'm trying to think what happens after that. I think yeah, it's more kind of like moving around the house.
Yeah, it's just like which is another thing that this film does really well, which I think horror films and action films often fail to do, which is it's very good at establishing a sense of place and where things are in comparison to other things. So like kind of, oh, this is this room, this is that room, this is how it connects to
That's true.
this.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a very real like any good, I'd say, horror action film, it does a very good job of establishing sort of a map of kind of where everything is in relation to everything else. And so those kind of like early moments, I think, is sort of an excuse to kind of draw out that map and kind of show you, hey, this is where this is. And as that's going on, there's sort of these little strange things that are going, but they're not like they're not big things. They're just kind of like little, like, oh, that's a little weird. That's a little strange.
yeah. Right away, you're a little weirded out. And then I think they have dinner.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because that's when Matt goes to get the watermelon, right? Right after dinner.
Yeah. So yeah, they're gonna have dinner, and they're like, okay, let's have the after kind of walking around the house.
Hmm.
Mac's like, okay, I'm gonna go get a watermelon. And she goes to get the watermelon out of the well because she's hungry, and she doesn't return. Okay, it's kind of weird. So Fantasy goes to, and they put the watermelon like on a rope. And Fantasy's like, okay, let me go find Max. She's kind of been gone for a while, and she goes to the well and she kind of fishes out what she thinks is a watermelon, but it turns out to be Max's head. It's her severed head. We never see her body. We don't know where her body went. We just see her head, and she says Fantasy's name. She says Fantasy, like as if the head is alive, and it ends up biting Fantasy's butt as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, pretty much from that point forward, the whole movie is just completely just off the rails. I mean, it's just like things fall like weird, very strange, what can only be described as supernatural things are going on.
Mhm. And what's interesting is right after the scene, Fantasy goes to tell everyone else, and they're immediately like, "Nah,
What are you
nah,
talking
that's ridiculous. No one." And this is true through like the whole film is no one will ever believe Fantasy, which is just. I mean, like the first time you're like, yeah, but after a while, I guess it plays into like the humor, and again, like they're so set on being innocent that they refuse to kind of see the world. And Fantasy, I suppose, sort of ironically, is the one that kind of sees past the fantasy, and she sees after the severed head thing, like she sees the auntie. She like shows an eyeball right
Yeah,
coming out of
they
her mouth.
they basically, like, straight up just say that, like, Auntie ate Mac, like, she
Mhm.
ate her, like, literally, like, ate her body parts, and, yeah, that's, like, one of my favorite, like, visual parts of the movie where, like, they're, like, all eating together, and she opens up her mouth, and it's like an eyeball, and she even, like, moves it around. She kinda, like, teases Fantasy, like, "Yeah, I know you know something's off, like, I'm kinda messing with you right now." Also, after that too, after they eat, at the beginning, the ant is, like, in a wheelchair,
Mhm.
and then, like, as soon as, like, Mac disappears and she eats her, she's, like, getting up and she's walking around and she's suddenly very active.
Yeah.
Like, "Huh, I wonder why she feels that way. Okay." And then she does the thing where she, like, disappears in the fridge.
No, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love that part because, like, the way that the camera is situated, it's not, like, on Auntie. Like, you kinda see everybody in the shot, you know what I mean? So it's not like, "Whoa, look at this," you know, it's like the ant went into the fridge and she disappeared. It kinda happens, like, the camera they're walking around the kitchen, and then she opens the fridge, and then she just falls in, like, kind of just one shot instead of, like, doing anything too crazy. So,
Mhm.
even when, like, the movie is kind of weird and all over the place, it does kind of have like those moments where it's just kind of like one thing going on that's kind of funny or a good visual cue or gag or something like that. And they open the fridge, of course, and she's not in there.
Yeah, and isn't what happens is okay, so she's in the background, she walks into the fridge, and
Hmm.
then, like, she's up on the stairs or, like, at the top,
Yeah, she
and
like,
she's at the forefront of the
yeah,
screen,
yeah, that's
right?
right, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
she like
yeah.
appeared. That's so good.
It's a really just, like, well thought out, just, like, visual just beautiful visual and just, like, the kind of way that she moves from, like, the background to the forefront, and also kinda shows how, again, their ignorance and, like, how like, they're not really, like, looking at their surroundings or the background, but then when she comes in the front, it's like she's right, she is the kind of thing that's getting them, she's the thing that's attacking them, she's the thing that they fail to see. It reminds me in a strange way, it reminds me a lot of and I think there's a lot of references to this sort of early work of say like a Charlie Chaplin or a Buster Keaton and a lot of the physical comedy. And even like as you're saying where they have like the like spotlight a certain person, everything else like be like a mask and everything else would be black. It's very reminiscent of films from the 20s and 30s. And I think there's this sort of nod to it in that way.
They're like classic film gags. They're classic film gags that work every time. Yeah, it kind of adds like an old element to it a little bit, even
Mm,
though the movie is like just like 10 million years in the future.
yeah.
And the way that it kind of communicates information. Yeah, she disappears, and then like yeah, people are like attacked, and weird things are
Mhm.
happening, including which I think is one of the more beautiful moments when Gorgeous sits at her aunt's mirror.
Yes.
So that part's like really really good.
That is a absolutely beautiful scene. She's sitting in front of the mirror and, like, the mirror, like, transforms into, Auntie or
Like a bunch of things happen.
yeah.
Yeah, she's like looking at herself in the mirror. I think she's brushing her hair, and she becomes the ant. And I think like the mirror shatters,
Mhm.
and then it turns into like fire,
Yeah.
and then her face like shatters too. So it's kind of hard to explain. Like
Yeah.
pieces of her face start falling off, and she's like kind of like a body of fire sitting in front of the mirror.
Mhm.
I think like that scene can be interpreted many different ways, but I think the main thing is that like she is being possessed by your aunt. I think that's the idea. But it looks amazing. It's just you could also say it's like something to do with like maybe like I don't know, maybe something about her, like the shattering part. Like it's one thing, like maybe she herself is being shattered. Like you could look at it from the perspective of Gorgeous, and maybe about her view of the world is being shattered, how she views herself, how she views everything is being shattered. I guess you could say. But yeah, the basic thing is that she's being possessed.
So that scene's going on, and she's being possessed. And then is that at the same moment where Melody is playing the piano?
I think so. I think so. Melody plays the piano. I forget when, but she plays it like twice. So I think she plays it once, which is just she's playing the specific song. I don't know what it is, but it's basically just like one of the main songs of the soundtrack.
Mhm.
Which the music, by the way, is very interesting. It incorporates like many different styles.
Mhm.
Like there's like a couple like sunshine pop rock songs and stuff, and it kind of blares throughout the whole movie pretty much. Like it almost never stops except for maybe a couple points. But yeah, I really like the soundtrack. I could see maybe somebody saying that the soundtrack is a little much, and maybe it could be a little bit more weird. I guess you could say, but I thought it was fine for the most part. But yeah, I think what happens is that Sweet disappears, the mattresses, because I think like they look at the piano, she plays the piano, and then her friends are like, "We got to find Sweet," and they're like, "Okay," and they're going look for her, and then what happens is that Sweet needs to get like mattresses or blankets in like a linen closet, and then the mattresses basically attack her, which is kind of funny. It's like very I don't know, it's unexpected.
Mhm.
It's just, like, the threat was the mattresses because like all the items in the house are basically living and do crazy things.
Mhm.
And basically, yeah, like she gets basically eaten. And all of her friends, they go and they're like, "Oh wow, we found all of her clothes, but we can't find her." I think they found the cat. They found the cat under all the
Yeah.
mattresses. And then there's the piano scene, I think.
If
Well,
one
I think actually they try to leave, right?
Yeah, they one of them tries to call, like, I don't know if they're trying to call Togo or they're trying to call, like, the police. They're trying to call someone, and as they grab the phone, I can't remember for some reason they can't call. I don't exactly remember why.
It's just not working.
Yeah, it's
I
just not
think.
working. Something like that. Yes. And then there's that scene outside. I think this happens around the same time. This whole I think one of the incredible things about this film is that the sense of time is just so surreal. And like honestly, if you asked me like the moment the film finished, like what order things happened in, I don't know if I could do it because it's just
It's
like yeah, it's a lot and it's all kind of happening simultaneously and it's just incredible. And I think around this time, the I don't remember names. The one that does kung fu, you know,
kung fu.
kung fu. Okay, that's what I thought. Kung fu. She's outside and she's attacked by
Yeah.
something.
That's part of like yeah, that's part of the movie where it's like they're being attacked by like all the different objects, and yeah, she has to fight all the objects and stuff. That's outside. That's before they get locked in. But yeah, like that's another scene, a great scene of like kung fu has like Jackie Chan abilities or something, and she can
Yeah.
fly. She's super strong. That's or she's called kung fu, and she's able to defeat the flying objects that are coming at her. Yeah, just like all random objects. I think it's like the fire or like the wood or something like that because she's
Something like
chopping
that.
wood. I
Yeah.
think the wood attacks her.
So then the piano scene happens. The second piano scene.
Yeah, they're trying to leave, and then all the doors close and all the windows
Mhm.
close, and they're basically
Yeah.
trapped. And they're like, okay. I think, but Gorgeous was able to escape. So they go to find the aunt,
Mhm.
and I think like the next thing they find is like Mac's severed hand in a jar. Because at this point, they still feel like at this point they're still not sure if anything. They don't think that anything supernatural is going on.
Which is just fascinating. Just like
Yeah, it's a little interesting. I mean, like I mean, I'm a pretty skeptical person, but I don't know. It's like the door is like it's like what the heck? Like they're doors that you move with your hands. That's not like a mechanical door, and it's just like they're like, oh, okay, let's find the aunt. She can open the door for us. And then after that is the piano scene, which is maybe my favorite scene in the movie.
that scene is just incredible. And basically Melody is playing the piano and she is eaten by the piano. And one of them witnesses the eat. Is it Fantasy that sees it? Or is it one of the other ones that they like see her getting eaten?
I want to say it's fantasy.
I think it's Fantasy sees her like being eaten, which is just absolutely horrifying. And the whole time the piano's playing, and then after she's completely eaten, there's still like her fingers, like just like part of her fingers still playing the piano.
Yeah.
And the other girls, with the ones that are left, which at this point there's not very many of them.
There's
There's
like
like
3 left?
3 left, yeah. They come up and Fantasy like tries to explain what came up. I think she also see the mattress thing too? I feel like she saw that too.
Yeah, I think she has more or less witnessed everything. I think she also is the one who found, Mac's head too. So, yeah, it's like Fantasy is like, yeah, she's just being, she also saw the eyeball. Like, she kinda is for some reason, she is the one who has been seeing everything, and I guess that comes into play at the end of the movie. But, yeah, like, the piano scene is just amazing how it's just a visually like, the animation, the visual
Mhm.
quality of it's just amazing. Just like, yeah, like I love the scene where like it chomps down on her fingers and she like looks at her hands and she has no fingers and stuff. Like that part is great. Like it eats her hand and yeah, it's just like her disembodied head and body parts are flying around. Just amazing,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
Yeah, the visuals are just so surreal and incredible, and just the combination of, using green screen, but also using, like, animation and just a lot of different visual techniques makes for this really surreal experience. Like, I wouldn't say it looks, like, realistic, but I don't think it's supposed to. I think it feels terrifying, I guess, and I think they really get that across in that scene.
I think then they find gorgeous and she's wearing a bridal gown.
Mhm.
I think at this point they're all kind of. By the way, one of the characters, Prof, is like kind of like I guess the book smart person.
Mhm.
Throughout the time they're in the house, she is always saying like, "Oh, it's impossible! No, 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 you're not
Yeah.
being logical." She's kind of the one who's continually saying like, "No, that's impossible. There's no such thing as ghosts. There's not. There has to be a logical reason for this." Like, the whole time she's kind of
Mhm.
being very skeptical, which is great. But I think they find Kung Fu and Prof. I think they find gorgeous. She's wearing her aunt's bridal gown.
Mhm.
Think she then gives her aunt's diary.
Yeah.
It kind of goes crazy from here because then they see Sweet and the grandfather clock, and she's like melting or something. She's like dying,
Mhm.
which is kind of weird. I don't. I guess I didn't. I guess that is supposed to symbolize something. I thought she just died in the mattress, but I guess she got transported to the grandfather clock and then died.
I don't know.
I really like. It's just like a lot of crazy stuff the way that they killed him.
And then objects start like kung fu starts like fighting off objects.
Yeah, they're fighting.
They like try to destroy like the painting of the cat.
I think first they barricade themselves in that room because I think like things are getting like really really crazy. And then before that, Gorgeous's head appears and she reveals kind of what's going on. So she reveals that her aunt died years ago waiting for her fiance and she eats unmarried girls. And luckily they're all unmarried, all 7 of them. So and I think yeah, just to I guess her spirit I guess maybe just needs it to keep herself alive or something like that. And they're continually attacked by all these different household items, which is very funny. Yeah, it's just like the spirit of the house, the spirit of the ant is like kind of infecting these items and they're kind of flying around and Prof is trying to like fight them off and stuff. And on the wall, it's where they were eating because on the wall is the portrait of the cat that they mentioned earlier, of
Yeah.
Blanche, who
Mhm.
Blanche throughout the entire movie is like appearing and running around. And I don't know what Blanche is supposed to be or represent. Maybe it's just kind of like maybe it's some like I don't know, like embodiment of some demon,
Yeah.
spirit or something. I mean, I would think that the ant, or maybe it's like a source of her power or something like that. Is kind of confusing.
Yeah. I think they say like early on in the film, like one of the first times they see Blanche, they say cats or like witches often like hide as cats or like they're familiars or something like that.
Okay. The one thing they continually say now that I remember is that any old cat can open a door. Like it takes like a magical cat or something like that to like close one, and the
Yeah.
cat closes the door a couple times throughout
Yeah.
the movie. So it's like yeah, it's clear. Once again, that's also setting up how like weird everything is. I think Kung Fu tries to destroy the painting because they're just like, look, that
Yeah.
painting, it's kind of acting weird. It's changing. It's looking weird, and then she dies.
Yes.
Do you remember how she died?
Not exactly.
It was the lamp, the
Yes, yes.
ceiling lamp. It fell on her head. Yeah, they don't. People don't really get like yeah, the way that the girls die. They don't get like stabbed or
Mm.
shot or tortured. Really, they don't get how typical movies kill people. They get like killed by lamps and mattresses and stuff like that. Obviously, the most grisly death is Melody because she gets like cut up into several little pieces by the piano.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's probably the most horror movie death.
So at this point, the cat portrait starts like spewing blood or like
It's like some water. It's like some
some sort of
purple.
like, yeah, some like red water thing, and it starts flooding the entire house. And they're like on like a door or something,
Mhm.
and then Prof falls off because she loses her glasses.
I think before that too. Remember, like even though Kung Fu dies, her leg is able to attack the portrait.
Yes, that's how the portraits.
It flies at the portrait, and I think it kills the cat. But the room is filling up with liquid, and they're gonna drown.
And so who's the one that's still alive? Because Prof ends up drowning in the water.
Yeah, a jar with teeth pulls her in. Yeah, and for some reason she loses all her clothes, and she's like swimming around,
Yeah,
and he dissolves.
yeah. Did you notice like there's this weird, and I think this has something to do with the innocence, but like there's this weird layer of sexuality almost, like because like I think of like the scene with Gorgeous and the bathtub, or like looking in the bathtub, or looking in the mirror, or at this moment where she's like kind of, or with Prof, and she's like all of her clothes are gone. There's this, I don't know, this like weird relationship with, I don't know if it's like nudity or sexuality or like puberty or whatever. It feels strange, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. I think the that part of the movie I don't think is very pronounced, but I
Mm,
think I think it maybe has something to do with puberty and the the innocence of that. Not really maybe in a sexual way, but more in kind of like a worldview kind of way, in a
mm,
perspective kind of way. Because yeah, once you reach a certain age, you start to see the world differently. So I don't think that the sexuality part is very pronounced, but I definitely see what you mean by like the puberty aspect for sure. Kind of that, the innocence of, I guess, everyday life.
I can't remember, when does the teacher, Mr. Togo, start. He's like driving towards the house and meets like the
We
watermelon
forgot about
man.
that part. Throughout so yeah, Mr. Togo is the teacher. He's unable to get to the train, so he decides to drive to the house.
Mhm.
And he's the most. It's funny too. I totally forgot about that part of the movie because there's a couple times in the movie where they're like, "Oh, I'm excited for Mr. Togo to be here," and when they're in trouble, they're like, "Oh, Mr. Togo will save us. He's a man. He's great. You know what I mean?"
And there's that I can't remember who has that. I get whichever one's in love with him, right? Has the fantasy of like him kind of like in the shining armor as like a kind of knight, right? It's also sort of, as kind of you were saying, this idea of being, saved by this man, or being saved by, this strong strapping knight per se, who's just going to be there and save you.
He's a coward, and he gets distracted. He gets like stuck in traffic. He goes and eats noodles, and then I think his journey ends at the watermelon stand.
Yeah, because that scene is
It's so
that
funny. It's
that
just
is
crazy.
such a strange scene. 'Cause he's like goes to the watermelon man, the watermelon's man like the watermelon, and Mr. Togo's like, "No, bananas." And then
We
in
see
the
later yeah.
yeah, and then he turns into a just a bushel of bananas. I don't know what to make of that. If I don't.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to say about that. It's just kind of funny. I guess maybe it's just kind of like saying how like useless he was. Like it's just kind of making fun of how like absolutely just like incompetent he was, and how like I think
Yeah,
that's the only thing I can say about that. It's pretty funny.
yeah, and him and, the watermelon man are the only 2 male characters in the whole film. It's very, especially for a film made in the early '70s, it's almost entirely a female cast, and the female cast is, all the female characters are kind of the ones who move the plot forward. He's just kind of like this bumbling fool who really can't do anything.
Yeah, he pretty much failed. He doesn't even really even know anything's going on. I mean, he's just
Yeah.
kind of driving to the house. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, they Prof dies in the blood. You're right, it is blood. It's Blanche's blood coming from
Mhm,
it. And I think like Fantasy finds Gorgeous. She's able to kind of paddle. She finds Gorgeous, and she's still wearing the gown,
mhm.
and she holds Fantasy. I think she holds her, and then it's like the next day. It's like tomorrow morning.
Is that how the film ends? Is there
No,
something that happens after? I can't remember what happens after.
the stepmom comes to the house. Remember, she finds the bananas because earlier in the movie she talks to the dad saying that like I think she says she's like, "I'm gonna go visit the aunt and kinda talk to her,"
Right.
because I think she wants Gorgeous to like her, and the aunt is basically the closest, I guess, family that their mom had. So she's, like, kinda, like, gonna talk to her, kind of like to, like, a motherly figure to get, like, approval or talk about something. Yeah, she, like, remember she finds the bananas, and then she goes to the house, and Gorgeous appears, and she's wearing the kimono, and she slowly opens the sliding doors, and they're playing that amazing song, and then Gorgeous says, like, "My friends will, be wake up soon, and when they do, they'll be hungry."
Yes.
And then they shake hands, and then she, like, burns her. She, like, turns on fire, and that's the movie ends, like, on a shot of Gorgeous, which is basically just the aunt. I mean, it's the aunt, she's basically took over Gorgeous's body. I mean,
Mhm.
she's now, a young girl again, and it's just, like, a shot of her, just, like, kinda like a beauty shot, and then the movie ends. Was the stepmom, like, put there by the aunt so she could have, like, an excuse for them to meet? 'Cause the stepmom acts kinda weird, but I could be wrong.
So you're saying,
I
like, the stepmom's like a trap
Yeah,
set by the aunt?
yeah,
But then why would the stepmom go there at the end?
just to see if the, plan was finished.
Yeah, I mean, I could almost buy that, like, maybe the stepmom is, like, under this sort of spell and definitely kind of puts Gorgeous's dad under a spell, and maybe that's also kinda has something to do with there's always, right, the wind in her hair, and there's this, yeah, almost magical aspect to her, I guess.
You think she's under
I could
her
definitely
skin?
see that. Yeah,
I'm not sure about that theory, but, I mean, it's kinda possible, I would say.
yeah.
It's just kind of, something to think about, but, yeah. I think more or less this was Obayashi's first movie, which is kinda crazy. I mean, it's like I unfortunately didn't do a lot of, research on this, but it says here in Wikipedia that, Toho, the film company, they wanted Obayashi to make a film like Jaws.
Yes, yeah, yep.
Yeah, it's not like Jaws at all. I love Jaws, but,
Is not like Jaws.
it's I don't think it's anything like, I don't think House is anything like Jaws, but, yeah, but I mean, it's a crazy movie. I mean, I just actually just scrolled down to this Wikipedia paragraph. That's interesting. Obayashi was born in Hiroshima and lost all his childhood friends from the bombings. I did not know that till just now. He applied these themes with the plot element of a woman's ghost waiting for her lover's return from World War II. The woman's bitterness about the war turns her into an evil spirit that devours the girls who are unaffected by the bombings. We got it.
We
We
got
had
it, we did it, we figured it out.
a Wikipedia article to figure it out.
We're basically Wikipedia.
We're Wikipedia. The, the guy who founded Wikipedia. Yeah, once again, it's kind of hard to describe a movie like this just because, we can kind of talk about, I guess, the plot all day about what happens and, this happens and this happens. But just the overall, like, visual, just kind of cavalcade of just like animation, both, hand drawn and stop motion are just including the editing and just everything and the set pieces and all of it together just creates an effect that's just like impossible to describe. There's
It's
nothing.
something else. There really is nothing like it.
There's maybe another movie that's like it that I like a lot. I watched this movie recently called Tetsuo the Iron Man. That it came after House in the 80s. That movie's very good too. I love that movie too because it's like just a crazy, violent, insane. It's way more violent and way more sexual, but just like a crazy, insane, violent movie that has like crazy editing and is just all over the place. Another Japanese movie, just incredible, and there's nothing really like it. But Tetsuo is definitely very different than House in terms of its themes and its ideas and certain things that it's trying to, I guess, communicate. But House is just plus Tetsuo is also black and white, and House is not. And yeah, I love it. It's one of the best.
So, out of 10, what would you rate it?
I feel like I've been giving nothing but nines, but House is definitely like an all-time favorite. I mean, you got to go with a nine. It's just, I don't think it's perfect just because I think like sometimes it can be kind of confusing, and the stuff with Mr. Togo is a little weird. But I think I mean it's just it's very very good. It's just so insane. It's just so crazy and bonkers and just very beautiful. There are plenty of beautiful moments. Like I said, it's hard to talk about because so much happens.
I've been, like, running this through my head all week because, like, I would say with, like, most movies, within, like, the time the movie's over, I'm like, "Okay, I know what this is gonna like, I know how I feel about this film," and I'm pretty, like, comfortable with the rating, and, like, at worst, like, I'm within, like, a point or 2 within a day. but I don't know. I really struggle to give this film a rate, and I've never had this. I've never seen a film and like not been able to like rate it. But because like on one hand, I think from a technical standpoint, it is spectacular. I mean, genuinely, especially for a director debut, it is just like clearly someone who knows exactly what they're doing. But on the other hand, it's so much. I don't know.
I think it's a movie that communicates information differently. You
Yeah,
know, that's how I see it. Like, yeah, it is like very different, and it's kind of hard to put like a finger on it. But I just think it's a movie that just kind of, it looks to communicate information differently than a typical movie would, or what the rules of a movie ought to be when communicating information. That's why I think it's amazing. It's just, like I said, the uniqueness of it is just unmatched.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very glad that I watched the film. I don't know if I enjoyed the experience.
Wow.
I mean, I think I have so much respect for this film, but like I don't know. Like there's like no good reason like everything about the film I should love it. And I have so much respect for this film and everyone involved, but I still didn't enjoy the experience. And I don't know why. I don't have a good reason why. I don't know if I think part of it was just like it's so much going on and the music is just always there and the editing is just everywhere at once and it's just so intense. And I came into this film basically blind. I mean, other than like what you told me about it, which was basically that it was all you told me was that it was a horror film. That's basically all I knew about this film
It's
coming
just what
in.
it is. I mean, it's a haunted house horror movie.
So, and I'm so grateful that I came into this blind because I don't know if I would. I'm very grateful that I had the experience I had, and I don't think a film you have to have a good experience with a film to be a good film. So, like, I think this is a very good film. I just didn't have a good experience with it, if that makes sense.
All right. I guess I see what you mean. I still love it.
Yeah.
Would you give it like an above average rating, like a 6 or a 7?
Yeah, I'd probably give it around a 6 out of 10. I think, like, just from technical, it's like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. But my experience was just
Just fine.
that's how I
That's
feel
okay.
in the house.
It's weird. It's
Yeah.
weird. I love it though. I can't. Yeah, I love that. That's a movie I like watching with other people because it kind of overwhelms you. But I like that. I like the overwhelming feeling of it. It's very good. But no, I see what you mean.
So I guess that's how we feel about House. I just want to make a quick shout out to my friends at Sequel Pitch. They are four friends who watch movies and then pitch a sequel to them. It's a really great podcast, really fun time, and while it isn't as great as Andrew and I's dynamic, it is a great time.
Thank you for listening. Please leave a review, subscribe to us. You can follow me on Twitter at adharp24.
And you can follow me at Austinlugo12 or at Let's Talk About This Movie. And you can also find this on Apple Podcasts, Instagram, or wherever you listen or watch to